From the 16th to the 19th century, the pirates that controlled the Mediterranean and the Barbary Coast captured hundreds of thousands of white Christians and sold them into slavery. These were lost souls that were never seen or heard from ever again. Everything they ever knew was ripped away from them: their land, their language, their religion, their homes, their families, and their friends. Few have ever heard of the white slave trade or of the tragic origin of the word slave or Slav. The Arab corsairs and their prisoners. The Ottoman Empire depended economically and socially on slavery's economy, and society relied on slavery. Slavery was their main source of labor, energy, and liquid power. The corsairs primarily targeted merchant ships and coastal villages and towns. Their principal victims ranged across ethnicities and religions, from Africans to Europeans, from Muslims to Christians. People from various ethnicities and religions were captured, including Muslims, Africans, and white Christians. Usually they were from impoverished families, but better to be poor than to belong body and soul to strangers. Over 1 million white Christians were captured over the centuries. This troubled the kingdoms and provinces of Europe and created conflict between Europe and North Africa. The peoples of the soul were stealing the lifeblood of the peoples of the north. How things have changed since then. How did it happen? The Arab corsairs, or pirates, arrived in sebex, or galleys. These ships had oars and Latin rigs. Triangular sails sat on a long yard, spar, mounted at an angle on the mast, and running in a fore and aft longitudinal direction. They beached on shores and unguarded beaches in the dead of night, and they raided peaceful settlements. They also captured ships and sailors. These stealers of men, women, and children operated fast. They came in and out with their horrified chained captives before the alarm bells could be sounded. These prisoners were doomed to be slaves on the pirate ships or sold in the sweltering, humiliating slave markets of North Africa, Algeria, Libya, Morocco, and Tunisia. The treatment of the white slaves depended solely on their captors. Some endured harsh, mindless, never-ending labor, other continuous physical and mental abuse and torture, others still religious persecution. Others became part of rich households or held high administrative positions. These were the lucky ones, but they were very few. The scale of the loss. In 1551, Ottoman corsair Dragut enslaved the entire population of the Maltese island of Gozo, capturing between 5,000 and 6,000 souls and sending them to Tripoli. In 1554, corsairs under Dragut sacked Viest, beheaded 5,000 of its inhabitants, and abducted another 6,000. In 1618, Algerian pirates attacked the Canary Islands, abducting 1,000. Barbary corsairs looted the cargo of ships they captured. From 1575 to 1580, they held author Miguel Cervantes in captivity, inspiring him to write Don Quixote, the Diary of a Dreamer. British Admiralty records have shown that between 1609 and 1616, the Barbary pirates captured at least 466 of their vessels. From 1625 onwards, the main recipients of live white cargo were rich black African Muslims. In 1631, small towns and villages on the coast of Ireland and England were raided. Nearly all the sailors in the tiny village of Baltimore in Ireland were taken into slavery. The majority were transported to Algiers, Tunis, Tripoli, and Moroccan towns. These British slaves were outnumbered. The Barbary slaves were white, black, brown, Protestant, Catholic, Orthodox, Muslim, and Jewish. Race and religion didn't matter, just labor. Machines didn't exist at that time. People and other beasts of burden did it all. The Barbary slave trade entered a repetitive cycle. The latest batch of slaves replaced the ones who'd passed or run away. 1/4 of all the slaves had to be replaced each year to keep the slave population stable. That meant about 8,500 new slaves had to be captured every year. Overall, this suggests nearly 1 million slaves would have been taken captive between 1580 and 1680. Nearly 500,000 more white slaves were captured before and since. British slaves. In 1661, Reverend Devereux Spratt began his ill-fated voyage from Cork in Ireland to England, but sadly his ship got captured by Algerian pirates. He was then taken into bondage, imprisoned in iron chains, and dragged to the city of Algiers. He remained there for long, hard years. They only gave him old black bread to eat and little water to drink. The slaves got beaten on the soles of their feet and bellies as a punishment. It hurt like hell, and their fate depended on the feelings of the slave owners. Some masters refused to harm their slaves, either out of kindness or out of greed. Others did the worst possible things, treated them like slaves. Slaves collapsed exhausted. Only abuse got them back to their feet. Captain Mudum and Mr. Dawes were also slaves. Together they labored on large projects, building walls, quarrying stone, felling timber, constructing galleys and harbors. Yep, they were certainly kept busy. Slave owners. Arab societies had pashas or lords ruling over the people. These pashas had power and wealth, the power of life and death over the many. Public slaves became the property of the ruling pasha. He had the right to claim 1/8 of all the Christians that have been captured. He also had the option of buying as many slaves as he wanted and at a reduced price. The slaves were jammed into large prisons known as baños or bathhouses. These saunas were overcrowded and dirty, reeking of vermin and disease. Private parties also owned slaves. These slaves had different duties and services. Some slaves were companions of their owners, others slaved in construction or agricultural labor, selling water or trading in town on their owner's behalf. Part of the slave's earnings had to be paid to their owner. Those who couldn't pay, they were beaten. This encouraged them to work harder, the incessant beatings and mental abuse. Slaves lost their culture, their minds, their religion. More times than not, they converted from Christianity to Islam, and have remained like this to this day. Fishermen were common among the slaves and were enslaved because of these skills. Breadwinners were taken away from their families, who were then left fending for themselves. These fishermen had experience and were a great asset to the slavers. Thousands of slaves perished, worked to exhaustion and death. Older slaves would be resold, often repeatedly. The unlucky ones would end up forgotten, lost in the desert or in forgotten towns. Some of the unfortunate older slaves became galley slaves, rowing around in circles for decades without ever being allowed to disembark, to get off their ships. They had no more freedom than the sails or the oars. Female slaves. European slave women had little hope of buying back their freedom. Tens of thousands became concubines, the lesser wives and consorts of their Muslim overlords. In fact, most female slaves were bought by the pasha. This was his privilege, his power over women. Some were taken into his harem, a separate household for wives and mistresses, a prison of gender. Most of these unfortunate and humiliated women languished in North Africa until the end of their days. They were maltreated, diseased, and suffered from starvation and neglect. Christian slaves had to raise their children as Muslims. They lost everything: their freedom, their identity, their individuality, their self-respect. They belonged body and soul to the master and to his pleasure or displeasure, and not themselves. Harsh treatment. Being a slave and having all your rights and freedoms taken away is a cruel enough punishment, but slaves endured so much more than just that. These innocent souls were only given one change of clothing per year. Imagine having to wear the same outfit every day for a whole year. The lives of the white slaves in Africa were just as unbearable as the lives of the black slaves in America. This is a forgotten part of world history. On the one hand, the African slaves did grueling labor on sugar and cotton plantations in the Americas, and on the other hand, European Christian slaves slaved to their dying breath in quarries, in large-scale construction projects, and rowing the corsairs around in their slave galleys forever. What did Europe do about it? Arab pirates raided the ships in the Mediterranean and the Atlantic, devastating the peoples and economies of England, France, Italy, and Spain. Thousands of ships were lost. Long stretches of the Italian and Spanish coasts were almost entirely abandoned by their inhabitants. Coastal areas from Malaga to Venice depopulated. So, how could powerful Europe allow these raiders to steal their people? The Protestant kingdoms and provinces in the north were anarchic and incapable of protecting or liberating their people. The Catholic kingdoms and provinces in the south took white slavery much more seriously. They tried to buy their family members back, but this wasn't cheap or easy. The clergy, mostly members of the Trinitarian or Mercedarian orders, dedicated their lives to voyaging to Barbary and back again, paying ransoms and buying their believers back. Parish churches in Spain and Italy had locked collection boxes labeled "for the poor slaves." Clerics reminded rich parishioners to include ransoming societies in their wills and to dedicate their inheritance to buying back their Catholic brothers and sisters. These slave-liberating charities sprouted up in hundreds of cities and villages in the South. Ransoming slaves became one of the greatest blessings a Catholic could perform, since slaves were the perfect charitable cause. Their only fault, their crime, is recognizing Jesus Christ as the most divine Savior and of professing Him as the true faith. By the 18th century, they'd made huge inroads and rescued thousands. The rest were lost to Christendom forever. In the early 19th century, the First and Second Barbary Wars took place. The US allied itself to Europe and defeated the Barbary pirates. The Barbary slave trade declined and disappeared. So, why does no one know anything about the white slave trade? First things first, it's uncertain exactly how many people were enslaved. Detailed records weren't kept. The captured people lived in outlying regions along the coastline. Many were women and children, and no one kept track of them or cared enough. It was like they'd never been born. Their lives were stolen from them, and no one could ever bring them home again. From the 16th to the 19th century, enslavement was a very real possibility for anyone who traveled in the Mediterranean, or who lived along the shores in places like Italy, France, Spain, and Portugal, and even as far north as England and Iceland. But it seems like once again Europeans are in denial about their past, present, and future. Slavery is everywhere.